So now over to you, Paul, for introduction to law.
Thank you very much, Declan. And sorry, once again, I will see what I can do in terms of sharing. Just 1 second, bear with
I'm
me.
sorry, Paul, just when I think about
Yep.
it as well,
hmm
can you fire those two presentations
Yep.
over to me on an email and I'll include it in the pack that I sent out to people this afternoon?
Sure, we'll do. No
Yeah.
problem.
Okay, appreciate that. Thanks.
Okay. Okay. Morning, everybody. Just for anyone that has just joined, unfortunately, if you've already been with me, you'll hear a repeat. So my name is Paul Daly. I've been working with Declan for the last kind of 12, 13 years, and prior to that, if we go even further into the mists of time, I was sitting where you were sitting, and I was one of Declan's students. So I have done this course myself, albeit a little while ago, and it's changed a bit over the years. Um, I'm not a lawyer, despite the fact I'm going to take you through the law course. I'm not a lawyer, much to my parents' disappointment, and I'm certainly not a judge either. But I did study law back in UCD back in the 90s. So I did each of the modules that we are covering off. I actually spent a full year doing, well, 9 months, I suppose, doing each of them. So I can tell you it's nice doing the condensed version. Um, and so I'm gonna take you through those. So don't work in the business, but have studied it, and been teaching this course for a number of years as well. So happy to take the opportunity to say hello. Okay. What I will do is I will take you through. Hopefully you're able to see the screen. Do you see Introduction to Law flashing up? Or super. Okay, great. So what I'll do again, just to repeat for any of you that weren't on the first session. There's no need to take any notes. All of this will be covered over multiple times in the notes. Okay, so just to give you a flavor. Law is obviously a very lengthy topic. Okay, so we're not going to go into any real detail here, but all I want to do is just give you over the next half hour, just give you a bit of a flavor as to what's in the four modules, and you can get a sense as to what's going to be coming up in the weeks ahead. Okay, so it's four modules over the next few weeks. All right. So what we'll cover off is if we start with module one, what we cover off in module one is we're going to cover a number of categories. We're going to start with the sources of Irish law. Okay. So if you stop somebody in the street and you say, okay, where do the laws of our country come from? They would probably say the Dáil, okay, that the politicians decide on a change in the law and then it's voted upon, and then that's how laws become laws in the country, which is true. That's one of the ways, but there are actually a number of other ways in which we get our laws in the land as well. So the Dáil is one of them. That is correct. Another one is common law. Okay, we did actually inherit a legal system from the British back when we were part of what is now the United Kingdom. Okay, so a lot of the laws in the UK are actually quite similar to the laws in Ireland because that's where they originally came from, and they will be followed by the judges whose job it is to enforce them. So common law is one of the ways that we do it. There is what is known as judicial precedent. Okay, so judges tend to follow judgments from previous judges unless they are able to point to a particular difference in the case. So there's known as judicial precedent. That is the third way. There is EU law. Okay, so good example of that would be GDPR. Um, so there are laws that are decided at EU level, and they are imposed not just on the citizens of Ireland, but also the citizens across the European Union. So that's another way in which we get our laws. And then the final one is the Constitution. Okay, so when was it? It was kind of a year ago, or a year ago, or coming up on a year ago. We had two referenda. One about expanding the interpretation of the family, and the other about solidifying the role of a carer in the Irish Constitution. Both referenda were defeated, so neither of them were put into the Constitution. But that is one way that we get our laws as well. There's certain rights and certain kind of things that are included in the Constitution. If we ever want to change them, it can be done, but it can be done by referendum. And if the referendum passes by one vote, then it is carried and the change is made. If it is defeated by one vote, it is defeated and the change will not be made. Although when it's close, sometimes it tends to be run again, which we've seen a little bit in the past. But those are the ways in which we get some of our laws in this country. Okay. We're going to take you through the differences between civil law and criminal law. Okay, if you think of law in the movies and in TV, a lot of times you're dealing with, unless it's a TV show specifically about a law firm, A lot of times you're dealing with criminal law, okay, which is certainly a part of what goes on in the courts, but there is also civil law, which is to do with contracts, to do with accidents, commercial disputes, employment law. And if you watch the news, they won't be on necessarily every night, but if you watch the news maybe for 2 weeks, you will almost certainly come across an employment law case, maybe a judgment relating to an accident, something like that, which will be discussed in the news. Okay. And so we cover that. We take you through some of the roles that of legal parties in the states. So I mean, you have solicitors who deal with, by and large, deal with the public. You have barristers who are kind of the link between the solicitor and the judge. You have the Attorney General who advises the government on legal matters. You have the Director of Public Prosecutions. So in the event of a criminal case taking place, it'll be if it's on the more serious end, it'll be the Director of Public Prosecutions will take the case on behalf of the victim and attempt to impose justice upon the defendant. So we're going to take you through all of that as well. So that takes you about the halfway mark of Module 1. Module 1 is probably the longest. Okay, so I suppose don't be put off by Module 1 in that it's not that Module 2, 3, and 4 get longer and longer and longer. I think Module 1 probably has the most in it. Okay. The second part of Module 1 is contract law. Okay, so we're going to take you through what a contract is. So again, if you rely on TV, contract normally involves kind of somebody signing something at the bottom of a piece of paper, which they may or may not have read. And that is, yeah, I mean, certainly for the more serious transactions, that tends to be the way that contracts are completed. But it's not the only way that a contract can be completed. There are basically 4 requirements to complete contract law, and none of them directly involve a signature. What you have is you have an offer. Okay, so let's say I say to you, would you like to buy my car for 10,000 euro? That's me making an offer. If you then reply back and you say, yes, I would like to buy your car for 10,000 euro, that is what is known as acceptance, which is the second requirement in contract law. You then have the third requirement, which is consideration. Okay, so you need something to be changing hands. If I just say, would you like my car, and we forget about the 10,000, that's not a contract. Okay, that's a gift. Okay, that's me giving you the car. And if we have a falling out in a month's time, I can in theory say, you know what, I'd like my car back, and I should be given it. Okay. If we exchange money and 10,000 comes over to me and my car goes the other direction, if in a month's time I decide I want it back, a court may not necessarily say, well, you're entitled to get it. Okay. So that's the third requirement. And then the fourth requirement is intention for legal relations, which may or may not involve an actual signature. Okay. So if we're talking about you buying my car and there's emails going back and forth, and maybe there's a line saying, describing my car, and saying, maybe I have a number of cars, and what I'm talking about is the blue car, and it is this year and this model. That suggests, and there's emails back and forth, that would suggest an intention for legal relations. If we discuss me selling the car in a nightclub at 3 o'clock in the morning after copious amounts of drink, that it makes it less likely that we are engaging in something that is designed to create legal relations. Okay. And then finally, to close off Module 1, we'll talk about what happens when the law of contract is breached. Okay, so the types of remedies. We'll talk about damages that one side might get. We'll talk about specific performance, whereby a court would say, okay, I rule that the contract is being enforced, and Paul agreed that he was going to sell his car for 10,000. Therefore, Paul is going to, and is now trying to back out. I rule that Paul has 2 weeks to do that, okay, and to sell the car for 10,000. So we talk about that, and we can also talk about the rescission of a contract where the court does the reverse and says, what we're going to do is we're going to put the parties back to the way they were. So Paul will keep his car, but the person who's going to buy the car is going to keep their 10,000. Okay, so we talk about the various remedies in terms of a breach of contract. Okay, so that's all covered off in Module 1. It's the longest of the 4 modules, I can definitely say that. So don't be put off by it, but those are the topics we cover off in Module 1. Any questions on that before we move on to Module 2? Okay. So what we cover off in Module 2 is company law. Okay. And this is particularly useful for those of us working in the credit and collections type environments, because there are certain requirements that companies need to abide by. And if they don't abide by those requirements and you're not getting cooperation out of them because ultimately you're not getting paid, these can be useful kind of hammers to kind of hang over them to ensure that they comply with what it is you want them to do. So what we do is we go through the reporting requirements in Irish law. Okay, so depending on the size of the company, there are certain reports that you need to file, and these are useful for those of us in the credit management side of things because they help us establish what type of risk we would be undertaking in dealing with the company. Now, if the company is fairly small, excuse me, reporting requirements are relatively minor. But if the company is very big, which I suppose for most of my credit collections life, I've been dealing with bigger organizations. The reporting requirements are quite large, so it is not particularly difficult to get hold of profit and loss accounts and balance sheets and things like that. You need to be able to know how to read them, so that's a different course. These are documents that you can get your hands upon. So the reporting requirements in Irish law is the beginnings of what we cover off in module 2. Okay, we're going to talk to you about the CRO, which is the Company Registration Office. And then I always get this one wrong, so I have it written down here. So the Office of Director of Corporate Enforcement. Okay, so the Company Registrations Office deal with things like kind of changing the name of companies, kind of naming the company themselves, naming who the directors are that are going to run the company, things like that. The Office of the Department of Director of Corporate Enforcement deal with things that have maybe gone wrong in the corporate world. Okay, so things that are happening that should not have happening. So they would be the type of people you might bring a complaint to if you feel that there's some dealings going on that are not appropriate. If you feel a company is hiding assets, if you feel a director is working with that company, but from paying attention to the media, that director was banned from being a director in companies just last year. The Office of the Director of Corporate Enforcement are the group that you would bring some of the attention to. So we'll bring you through some of the functions of those two organizations. Okay. We'll talk to you about liquidations. Okay, so there's a couple of different types of liquidations. Liquidations can be driven by creditors who are saying, okay, we feel that if this company is allowed trade any longer, there's going to be no money left. We have large debts with this company, and we would like to see some of those debts discharged. So, the creditors band together and start calling for a liquidation. But then there's also members' voluntary liquidations, which are a bit more amicable, where you may have a scenario where maybe 3 or 4 people in college banded together and set up a company in their 30s. They then reach their 60s. They look at the company and say, our bank accounts are extremely healthy, so let's wind up the company and call it there, and we'll just go off and enjoy the money that we have in our bank accounts. Okay, so we deal with the different types of liquidations and what the requirements are and what the expectations are in each case. We talk about examinership. Okay, so the function of examinership is to try to enable a company that is in trouble to survive. Okay, so the management team or the MD may be asked to step aside. An examiner will take the reins and will run the company for a certain period. They will be a qualified accountant. They will have a good idea as to what is going on in the company by reading the reports, reading the books, investigating things, and they will try and steer the company out of trouble in order to maintain the jobs for the people that are working there. So that's and there are certain protections that come in to stop the chances of the company going under increasing during a period of examinership. So we're going to discuss that. We'll cover off receivership, whereby there could be an arrangement whereby if a debt is not discharged within a certain period of time, that some company assets could potentially be seized by the creditors. So we'll talk a bit about the ways that those can be set up. And the final thing we cover off is the Consumer Credit Act of 1995. So the best example of that I can give, I mean, there's a lot of financial. It's not, I suppose, not a massive number of financial, but there are some financial institutions in Ireland, and you will see, because of that, it is competitive, and you will see them advertising on television. Okay, so if you ever watch an ad on TV, you will probably see a lot of white writing down at the bottom. This is to comply with the Consumer Credit Act, okay, and it's to point out things that may seem understandable for those of us that work in the business, but that actually are not. Things like if you buy something on credit, you're going to pay more. Okay, there'll be interest applied. You will frequently hear mentioned on the ad, if it's to do with mortgages, if you fail to keep up with your payments, you may risk losing your home. Okay, that is to comply with the Consumer Credit Act. So you get those in writing, mainly in writing, but a little bit of verbal on TV, on radio. Obviously, there is nothing to look at, so you can't read anything. But you will hear people. They will change the tone and they will mumble something quickly. You will this do in your home if this happens. So you will hear that regularly. So all of that is to comply with the Consumer Credit Act. So there are rules in terms of credit. It is, as it says in the title, it is for consumers. Okay, so this is what businesses would need to comply with. So if you are in the consumer side of things, certainly a very important document, and not unheard of that this has been an exam question in the past as well. So I'm doing for time, not too bad. That's module 2. I'm taking on to module 3 unless you have any questions. Let's see if my voice holds out to the end of the presentation. So module 3. Module 3 is primarily about EU law. It does there are some additional pieces that cross over into maybe sales of goods and kind of it's a little bit there's a bit of follow on in terms of contract law. But the primary thing that we cover off in module 3 is European Union law, which I did mention earlier is one of the ways in which we get our laws here. Okay, so we're going to take you through the founding principles of the European Union, which are things like freedom of movement of goods, freedom of movement of services, freedom of movement of people. Okay, so certainly, the more I explore it, the less convinced I am of it in some ways. But certainly the founding principles are that in theory, if you want to relocate from Dublin to Galway, well, I mean, we know that not beyond in theory and in practice as well. If you want to move from Dublin to Galway, there isn't anybody at the wall, as you enter Galway who says, right, I need the Galway visa, please. You can just do it. Okay. It should be in theory the same if you want to move from, say, Dublin to Paris. Okay. Or somewhere else in the European Union. Okay. So free movement of goods, and same with your goods. So free movement of goods, free movement of services, free movement of capital, free movement of people. There are some of the founding principles of the European Union. Okay. And comes up again if we to throw one eye across the news, comes up again from time to time when we're talking about things like migration or things like that in the news of people arriving into the country. Okay. We're going to take you through the European Commission, the European institutions, okay, to give you a good understanding as to what are the functions. And again, you won't go 2 weeks without watching the news, without seeing some broadcast that would relate to probably the Commission from Brussels. Okay, so the Commission is essentially the driving force of the European Union. They will make the strategic decisions. Okay, the European Union stands for this or wants to go from here to there. They will be key in driving the actual direction that the European Union will go. Okay, you have the Council of Ministers who, in a way, I suppose, kind of they action the requests of the Commission. So it's up to them to kind of bring it to life. The Commission will make the decisions. We're going from here to there strategically for Europe. The Council of Ministers will meet a couple of times a year, and they will try to bring about the various changes that the Commission has decided they want to engage in. You have the European Parliament, which operates similarly to our own Parliament, although it's an awful lot bigger. And what you have is you have like-minded parties kind of sitting together and working together. So the equivalent of Fine Gael in various other countries will all work to get together as kind of a voting bloc in the European Parliament. The Greens in various countries, for instance, will all work together. So European Parliament, we have 13 of the seats. There's 500 odd seats in the Parliament. We used to have 11 when the UK decided in their wisdom they were going to leave. We went up from 11 to 13. Had the election for them last summer and took about a week to do all the counting, but at the end of it there were 13 MEPs who went over to Brussels. And then the last of the European institutions is the European Court of Justice. Okay, so you may occasionally, again, it sounds like all I do is watch the news, but it's not quite true. But you may see on the news, there may be people who leave court in Ireland and they are unhappy with the decision. They have lost the decision. They say, "I'm going to take this all the way to Europe." Okay, and yeah, they can do that. The European Court of Justice, however, is not just a kind of straightforward kind of a appeal court. It is designed for if you feel your rights have been infringed as a European citizen. Okay, so let's say your freedom of movement has been infringed, maybe because you've been locked up, because you may have been seen to have done something wrong. You can in theory say, okay, that is impeding my European Union right to free movement of myself. Okay, so you can take that. You can't just necessarily take a case. You're not going to get very far if you're just going to take a case and say, well, I didn't like what the decision is, so I want to go higher. It's not quite the way it works. So it needs to be related to the European Union law. But there is a European Court of Justice, Strasbourg, I think it is, where you can take European Union law cases. Okay. And then finally, the last thing we're going to cover off is where the European law comes from. So, the next level down. So there's two places that comes from quite straightforward. First is primary sources, which are the various treaties. Okay, you may remember in the first decade of the 2000s, we went to the polls. Well, may have been four times in total, but it was for two. It was basically trying to pass two treaties. It was the Nice Treaty and the Lisbon Treaty. Okay, both of which ultimately end up being passed. But the various treaties that have been created since the 1950s, which guarantee free movement of goods, free movement of people, and so on. They are the first source of our European Union laws. And then the secondary ones is you have things like regulations and directives. Difference between them is the regulations are binding on all of us. A good example would be GDPR. You say, right, well, we don't really care whether you like it or not. This is the way the European Union wants to go in terms of protecting privacy. So it is binding upon all 300 odd million of you. And then you also have directives, which are secondary sources as well. And the best example of a directive might be the European Commission says, right, we are going to reduce greenhouse gases by, say, 50% in the next 10 years. They leave it open to the states as to how they do it. Okay, they can do it by banning cars. They can do it by incentivizing people to cycle. They can do it by banning big business. They can do something in agriculture or whatever it is they wish to do, but it's up to them to do it. But they're given a target and a goal. They said, right, go and bring this in. Okay. What do I got? I got 6, 7 minutes left. Any questions on European Union law? Okay. So finally, we come to tort. This was my favorite topic when I was in college, because the case law was fantastic, because you had a cacophony of stupidity in there. So tort is to deal with accidents. Okay, that's essentially tort means wrong. Okay, so it essentially deals with accidents. Okay, something has gone wrong. It's not criminal law. It's not contract law. Something has gone wrong. Okay, so you're dealing with. You can see it right there at the top. You can see the first thing that we deal with is negligence. Okay, and there's four things that we need to prove when we are talking about negligence. Okay, one is a duty of care. Okay, so as I did mention, back when I was a student, we were in lecture theaters when we were doing these topics. So I'd have a laptop in front of me. When I was doing the lecturing, I'd have my laptop in front of me and I'd be reading off the laptop. I have a duty of care to the people who sit near me. If I suddenly decide to start throwing the laptop around, I'm breaching that duty of care. Okay, it's not something you should do. Okay, so if you throw the laptop around and people are sitting maybe 5, 6 feet from you, good chance you're going to hit them. All right. So you have a duty of care to the people that are sitting nearby. Did I have a duty of care to people half a mile away on the other side of the campus when I was doing the lecturing? Less so. Okay. I had a duty of care maybe not to let off a nuclear bomb. But other than that, no real duty of care, because if I was throwing the laptop around, it was not going to do anything to damage them. All right. So first thing is there a duty of care? Second thing, did I breach the duty of care? Okay. So when you're talking about breach of a duty of care, you're asking the key question, what would a reasonable person do? If it's reasonable to throw your laptop around as normal, then that is not, then I have not breached the duty. If it's something that only someone really not well in the head would do, then it is a breach of the duty. Okay, so I have a duty of care to people nearby me, and I'm breaching the duty if I do anything that is endangering them. There needs to be damage. Okay, so if I throw the laptop around but it doesn't hit you, you're not in a particularly good position to sue me. Okay, you can maybe sue me for something called nervous shock, which we don't cover, but it basically involves scaring people. But other than that, you're not going to have a particularly good case for negligence. However, if I hit you in the head and draw blood, yes, there's been damage has been caused, and you have a good case against me for negligence. And the final thing that we need for negligence, we need a link between the two. Okay, so if I'm throwing the laptop around, I hit you on the head, and then 5 years later you die of a heart attack, is there a case? Not really, because it's very hard to link the two, that the two are linked. Okay. If I'm throwing it around, I don't hit you, but you die of a heart attack 5 minutes after leaving the room, yeah, there may be a link there, because well, Paul hadn't scared me by throwing the laptop around, it wouldn't have happened. So there may be a case for negligence there. Okay. So interesting area. We cover that off in towards the beginning of module 4. We also talk about occupiers liability. So we're talking about the three different types of people. You have visitors, you have recreational users, and you have trespassers. So visitors are people you invite onto your, the best example here is a field in the countryside. A visitor, let's say you're holding a fair in the field and you invite everybody to come, you have a duty of care to those visitors, okay? Let's say you have a field, but you're not running any fair, but you know that people, as part of hill walking groups, walk through the field. That's known as a recreational user. You have some requirements, but they're a bit lower than the people that you invited in. Okay, they're recreational users. You know they're there. You know they're there, but you have a duty not to injure them, but maybe not as much as if you actually invited them and sold them a ticket to a fair, something like that. And then you have trespassers, okay, where the each time the level of responsibility drops. Okay, you do actually have responsibility to trespassers. You can't put man traps all over the field to try to have a scenario where they step in them. So you can't do that. But your requirements are not as big as they would be for recreational users who maybe are there, but where you have a bit more responsibility, and then visitors we've actually invited them in. Um, and then we're going to cover off professional negligence and negligence misstatements. Okay, so going a step beyond negligence. I mean, the example I gave was somebody, I suppose, giving a lecture and throwing a laptop around. But you have professional negligence, which is okay, I hire a doctor or I hire a lawyer. They have certain requirements as to how they are going to behave. They need to behave as a reasonable, and they're higher than the reasonable person test. It's what would a reasonable doctor do? What would a reasonable lawyer do? So we're going to cover that off. And we're also going to talk about negligence misstatements. And that's your second assignment is on negligence misstatements. So negligence misstatements would involve somebody giving, in the case of our line of work, a credit reference. And then what if the credit reference was not, due care was not taken and the credit reference is completely wrong? They said, okay, Paul, instead of doing a company called Paul Limited, they did a company called Paul Daly Limited, and the two companies are completely different. And maybe Paul Daly is very, very rich, and has plenty of money to take on board a debt of 1 million, but Paul Limited is essentially broke, and nobody in the right mind would ever lend him 1 million. Okay, so we're going to cover that off. And then finally, we're going to cover off things, defenses. Did you play a part? Were you in some way responsible? If you're the victim, were you in some way responsible for your own demise? Did you bring a certain amount of it upon yourself because you yourself behaved in a certain way that maybe increased the chance that you were going to be damaged by the negligence that somebody else was causing? There's defense of that, the defense of necessity, and various other defenses that we'll cover off at the end of module 4. Okay. So in terms of what happens next, so notes go out not this weekend, not this weekend, and not into early next week, but next weekend. So that's going to happen. There are 4 short tests over the coming weeks, and then 2 assignments. And as I mentioned, one of them was on negligent misstatements, the other one's on contract law in module 1. So you have 2 assignments, and then we have the test May time, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, end of May.
Yep.
Yeah, it's the last Saturday in May, which is the week before the bank holiday weekend. So that's when we wrap up the term. So yeah, I hope it's not overly daunting to people. Yes, there is a lot to learn, and particularly in law. Personally, I loved law. I did a diploma in credit management even further back than you, Paul. And law was one of my favorite subjects in it, and particularly when it comes to contract law. And what I say to students is very simply that not to expect to have all the answers because it is only an introduction to law. What we're hoping is it'll give you the questions. So, is there a valid contract here? Is there a way to get out of this contract? And once you understand, the requirements for a contract, the rules of consideration, so it'll give you an overview from a business perspective that just helps you to ask the questions. So you're not going to become lawyers after a 4-module course. I hope you will have a depth of understanding. And for those of you just even living in the country, understanding how the legal system works, And back to watching the news, yeah, it does make watching the news more interesting, I think, because once you know who the DPP is and what the Attorney General does and how laws are enacted and the different stages and all that kind of stuff, it just helps to put it all into perspective. And while yes, we hear about the European Parliament and the Council of Ministers, we don't really know the divisions and who does what and what goes where. And I suppose this just gives you an overall understanding that helps with not only in credit, but in, general living as well. So at this stage, I hope you've enjoyed it. If you've made up your mind which of the two subjects, be it international or law, you want to do, please let me know straight away. If you're still making up your mind, by all means, let us know. But I do need to know by, well, say next Thursday. Would that be fair? Because I have to get the details over to you, Paul, so you know who to send the notes to or whatever. So if you can get it to me by next Thursday, and the sooner the better, obviously, it gives us time.
Declan, is
So
it okay if we put it into the chat there? Or I
yes,
think
yes, yeah.
oh
If you
yeah,
put it into
yeah,
the
okay.
chat, I'll pick it up there. That's fine. Yeah,
Okay, perfect.
yeah. And even if because I see who you are, so you just have to put in either the word law or the word international, and I'll be able to pick it up from that. So, or drop an email or whatever. So, guys, that's the morning. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you're looking forward to getting stuck in. It is going to be interesting. It is a journey. It'll add to your knowledge and understanding. And as I said, we're all here every step of the way for you. And we wish you all the very best of luck with your studies. And just go and have a great weekend. So I'll hang around till the last person leaves, just in case anybody wants to have a word with me. I'll actually stop recording now so you can talk to me off